Hello, my name is Rebecca Richardson, but most people call me Becky, and today I thought we could talk about how I plan my books. This is the second Preptober video that I've done this month, and I don't think it's the last one. No, I don't think it's the last one, it's just the second. I swear I know my own schedule. And this time I thought we could focus on my actual planning, since that's kind of what October is for, planning before NaNoWriMo. I talked about this in my other Preptober video, but if you don't know what NaNoWriMo is, basically in November writers aim to write 50,000 words, which is kind of the minimum, I believe, to class it as a novel, and that's it basically. But it's hard because that's a lot of words to write in a month. I can't remember what it is on average a day, but it's like over 1,500. It's a lot. It's not an easy thing. This is my first year taking part, and so I am actually planning now. I shouldn't have left it this late because I'm starting a new project, but I decided whilst I was going through the notes I have so far for the planning, we might as well do a video about this. I am gonna preface this by saying this is in no way a how to plan video. That's absolutely not what this is. I am in no way qualified enough to be telling you how to plan or write your own stories. This is just how I choose to do it. So to begin with, some general points I think about how I plan. I class myself as a plantser, as in I don't plan everything in detail, but I also do have some planning. I don't just go in blind. So I'm kind of in between somewhere. What that usually involves, which we'll talk more about in a second, is me kind of planning the basic things but leaving vague areas in between for me to fill in as I get to the moment. So then I have quite a nice balance of the main bits already being plotted to stop me from stressing about what happens next, but also it leaves me enough free room to also not stress about making sure that I stick to a strict plot line. In general, I don't enjoy planning. I'm just gonna say it, I don't like it. I think it's necessary for how I write, but I don't enjoy it the same as I don't enjoy editing. It's not something I like. If anything, at the moment, planning is actually making me less motivated for Nano, because I'm so sick of having to plan the story that I no longer want to write the story. But it is slowly coming together, and as I kind of come towards the end of my planning process, I am starting to rebuild that excitement, I think. Let's talk more about my actual planning process. I have a list. Here's my list of sort of a general bullet point of the order that I tend to do things in. I also have with me the massive notebook that I write all of my plans in for the story I'm writing for Nano. I was going to get out the notebook that I wrote the planning for my last 3 books in, but I decided that is far too messy. So we're going to go through this instead, because obviously it also applies to this year's Nano, because that'll be the project for that. So the first part of my planning process tends to just involve me thinking. To be honest, for a very long time I just think about it and I keep it all in my head, and we just roll with it like that until about now. When there's a month until I'm planning on starting something, that's when we begin to put things on paper. But up until then, it's all just thoughts. I think this project I've been thinking about for about a year now, and this usually just involves when I'm in the shower or when I'm supposed to be sleeping. Instead, my head's just we could do this, we could write about that, we could include this. That's when all my best ideas come, just before bed or when I'm in the shower. I also use this time to find locations usually. I find a lot of my inspiration comes from the areas I visit. So the story I'm writing for Nano this year is based in the city of York, and that kind of came from the fact that I was spending a lot of time there and in similar areas. The idea actually first came from Windermere in the Lake District, and I decided that was the vibe I wanted, and then I was like, where is somewhere nearby that I can visit more often? And I was like, York. So that's how we ended up with York, and since then, every time I've been there, I've kind of been planning routes and working out where I can use specific locations and where certain scenes could take place, and that's all just kind of been stored in my head. I also do the same with characters, as I find character inspiration. Sometimes it's actual people, sometimes it's characters, other times it's just things I see or things other people say to me. That again all just gets stored in my head for a very long time. Usually by the time it goes on paper, I already know everything about the characters other than their name. Naming characters is usually something that comes about once I've decided to commit to planning the story. It tends to come after the initial bit of the planning process, and that process is mind maps. This is when I first get ideas on a page. When I'm first starting to think about the plot, I tend to have the world and the characters before I have the plot, and so this is when that comes in. I just have so many scribbly mind maps in notebooks from when I've started trying to put the plot down. I still don't have a plot. for next month's story. I'm still trying to come up with that. We talked about that in my last Preptober video. I'll show you actually some examples of mind maps that I currently have. I don't know how I'm going to hold this up because like it's an absolute mess and it's also quite heavy, to be quite honest. I don't know why. Here we go. Here's some great examples. That there is a mind map. You probably can't hear me now because this is in my face, but mind map. And there's one to do with world building on the other side. They kind of become a mess fairly quickly, but that is my favourite way and the only way that really works for me to get my initial ideas on paper. When I have to organise them, we don't use mind maps, but the first bit of just getting things on paper is always in this form. Mind maps are how I plan literally everything. It is the first form that my plot takes on. It's also how I decide on locations in different settings that are going to be used. It's also how I work out character backstory, like everything that can possibly be put in a mind map is, especially world building. That's a massive thing that the mind map's used for. And again, something that we could talk about. So yeah, I don't actually think I'd have a planning process without mind maps. So like, I don't know, like thanks to like my year 3 teacher or something, I guess, for teaching me what a spider diagram is. This is usually the point as well when I start coming up with names for characters. And the way I name characters isn't overly interesting. I'm not someone who names them based on their personalities. Like I don't look up like, I don't know, the Latin word for something or give them like names related to their actual personalities or like names that foreshadow future things they're going to get involved in or anything. I just decide on names that I think fit the characters, and I don't really have control over this. It's not like I sit and I look at names and I go, yeah, you know what, maybe that'll work. Like it has to just click and I don't have a say in it. I have a character called Rhubarb because nothing clicked. And then I said I wanted it to be a plant-related name, and one of my friends was like, haha, rhubarb, and it just clicked. And for a long time, I hated it. I was like, rhubarb is such a ridiculous name, but it was the only thing that fit the character. So I had to reluctantly call him Rhubarb, or Rue for short. Now it's one of my favourite names in the whole thing, but that's literally how it works. It's just something will click, whether I want it to or not, and I'm like, well, I suppose that's your name now. It happened with most of my characters. Some of them do have choices for names. I'll have like a list. The main character for my next book is going to be called Alice, and we went through a few names for her, I believe, until I eventually decided on Alice. Then other characters, such as her brother Beau, was Beau before I even had anybody else's names. It was just kind of decided that he would be Beau. I think I had his name before I had even like the world building or an idea. Then there's other characters such as Adrian, who was just a name I heard in conversation. I heard somebody mention the name Adrian and my brain just went, oh, that's what that guy should be called. And that's just kind of how it works. The last names is usually more of a researching thing. I'll look up names kind of to do with either the area or like common last names in the area, or if I have a particular aesthetic I'm going for, that's when that comes in. The aesthetic for my nano project this year is very much like kind of spooky, dark academia, that kind of old English vibe. So all of their last names are horrifically pretentious, other than the 2 main characters who are called King, that's their last name. The rest of them is just, it's kind of slowly getting out of hand. One of the last names is Bannatyne, and other 2 characters have the surname Lockhart, and one character, Rhubarb, his name is Rhubarb Barclay, which is just so pretentious. It's so posh, but I just love it. It kind of fits the aesthetic that I'm going for. So last names do tend to have more of a process behind them than the first names. However, after all of the mind mapping and finally sorting out names, this is when I start to organise things a bit better. How my brain organises things is everything has to follow a very specific order. I have to be able to list it to know what's happening one after the other. Otherwise, it just will not go in my brain. That's how I process things. So at this point, usually I start just listing everything. I start taking those mind maps I've made and turning them into coherent notes. This tends to start with the world building. World building I tend to try and get out of the way first because I don't like having to do the world building section of planning. So that usually comes first, and I end up making pages and pages of like lists of everything to do with the world building that I need set out that I can just refer back to. This tends to be what those lists look like. Excuse the horrific lighting. Can we turn a page? There we go. That's what those lists end up looking like when they're actually on paper. That is all of my world building stuff that I actually ended up not using in the end. All of those lists I just show you no longer relevant because I decided we're not using high fantasy anymore. But I also do the same for plot and characters, see if I can find some plot things, because the plot lists don't tend to end up looking the same way the world building ones do, because with subplots in your main plot line, everything's kind of too interconnected for me to just list it. I have to have different lists for different plot lines and then a list that connects them all. Also, sorry if you can hear banging outside. Our neighbours are having their drive done. One of them is currently hammering something. That's an example of an actual plot list. There's more of it. There's probably even more of it if I turn the page, because that is the easiest way. Yeah, there you go. That is the easiest way for me to sort out the plot. It starts off with little things like that, and then when I have the plot, which we'll talk further down, all of these like kind of crappy lists will become a better list. And then the same also happens for actual characters. They end up looking more like that. You probably can't see the subheadings down the side, but we end up with like description, personality, that kind of thing as we go through it. Just so I know a bit more about the characters. There isn't actually a backstory place on that. That's something that I'm kind of working on separate to them at the moment, because there's a lot of research I need to do. And that is actually what comes next, the character research. Once I have everything sorted and I know the general idea of the world and the characters that are going to be in it, I have to start thinking about specific research that needs to be done. And usually the majority of this research is character focused rather than like location focused. When it comes to the location, the only research I'm really doing is visiting York more often. Last time I went, I took pictures of the locations I'd like to actually use. I was in the York Minster. I also took pictures on the Shambles and went into some of the shops there. And I got a few maps so I can actually look at it and route things and work out how characters can get from A to B quite quickly. Characters, however, usually take more research, because at the end of the day, everybody's very different, and so if all the characters had personality traits I knew everything about, then it would be kind of boring because they'd all be the same. And so I do have to do a lot of research for the individual things that I'm interested in. Some of these include actual themes that I want the characters to show. I'm trying to put quite a focus on this story on mental health. As much as it is a fantasy book, I do think that we deserve to see more mental health rep in books, and so there is things involving that I need to look into, such as specific mental health issues, family types, that kind of thing. I also have an autistic character, so I'm doing a lot of research into that at the moment, which also involves watching things with other autistic characters in. Then other themes tend to involve things like classism. I think when you have different types of characters who are going to be affected by different things, I find it really important to make sure I research all the different areas of their life that could affect them in some way. And I do have a few characters in my book who are affected quite massively by the fact that they are classed as like lower working class, and so I'm making sure I do a lot of research into how that will affect them. Then there are the hobbies that I also have to research. I have a character who is a very big fan of plants, and so I'm having to research plants of all things and find out lots of things about different types of plants. He also happens to be a fan of different types of tea, which I kind of know a bit better. I'm not like a big tea person, however I have a lot of friends who drink a lot of different types of tea, and I'm kind of getting most of my research through other people. But even things like music taste, I have to listen to other types of music, work out what kind of books certain characters would like. Even artists, I have 2 characters who are artists, and I have to look into what kind of artists they'd probably like to see more. Even pop culture things such as superheroes, that's something I'm having to look further into at the moment. Just all these different hobbies and interests these characters have that I need to know enough about to be able to write in a realistic way that makes it look like the character is also as interested in it as they're supposed to be. Once I have all of that sorted and I'm at a point where I think everything is good to go, that is when we move into the final stage of planning, which is actually writing out the plot. This is the stage I'm approaching currently with my Nano project. And the reason I'm not quite there yet is because I can't decide on a plot line, but when I do, this is what will happen next. It tends to end up looking something like that. That is currently how the plot is going for the project I'm writing next month. It is better than it once was. I think I've almost decided on a plot line that will actually work for me. In fact, I'd say that's probably going to be it. There's just a few things that need adding. There's a few vague bits in the middle that are too vague that I need to work on. But once I have that sorted, I will be writing it up and colour coding it. In fact, I'll see if I can find an example. That will eventually look like this. That is the part 1 of my second book. I just happened to find this in a drawer. I don't know where all of the other versions of this are. These are all different bullet points. I don't know if you can see different bullet points in different sections for the book. There are also chapter markings there, but that's not actually part of it. I add that in after, when I find out where the chapters end, and then I can see it visually. I don't decide what's going to happen in what chapter at first. I don't even know how many chapters there'll be when I start it. I just kind of decide as I go along. The way the colour coding works is blue is minor events, purple is major events, and green is subplot. The reason that I do it like that, because I know some people think it's a bit of like an odd colour coding scheme, is just because it helps organise things in my brain. And also so I can look at it and visually be able to see if it's going to be a half exciting story. Obviously, if I look at it and it's mostly blue, which is all just the minor stuff, then I have to think, okay, maybe we should be including some more major plots in this to make it more exciting, to pick up the pace kind of thing. And if there's not enough green, for instance, then I'll add some green in because that is subplot, and so I can look at it and be like, okay, maybe we haven't got enough subplot in this. Or even in some cases there's too much purple and I think the pace is going to be far too fast here. I need to bring that back a bit. And it just helps me see everything in my brain. But that is the final bit of planning that I do. Once I start colour coding, that is it, we are done. When the colour coding finishes, it's time to write. Some of the points that end up being on those lists are kind of vague on purpose. The majority of it is key moments within the book, like things that I know have to happen. And then other bits in between, it'll just be vague areas where I need to add something. So maybe it'll say like characters go shopping, because I know that the characters have to go shopping, but what happens whilst they're there I can just make up on the moment. Or I'll include an arrow between two major points that just says like discussion here or something has to happen here, and then I'll just decide what that something is when I get to it. I find that helps me stop stressing too much because it keeps the balance between planning but also not having to stick to a really strict outline, which I just think would really stress me out. The same as not having an outline at all would stress me out. So yeah, that's how I plan. I think it's quite a process, and it's a process I haven't yet finished for my NaNoWriMo project this year, but hopefully we'll get there soon. No doubt throughout November during my Nano vlogs you will see some of these planning things appear. I will probably actually have a colour coded plotline in hand most of the time because that's just how I refer to it. I tend to have it pinned somewhere over my computer so I can see it better. Please do comment down below how you plan. I would quite like to see the different range of ways in which people plan. Sometimes I hear how people plan their stories and I just don't understand how they can do it. And I find it very interesting just to see all of these different methods people use. Are you a planner? Are you a plantser? Do you outline to the word count? Do you know exactly how many words are going to be in a chapter? Or do you have absolutely no idea what's going to happen in your story before you start writing it? But other than that, that is it from me today. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end, and I will see you very soon. Bye!